Ready for retirement? Think again. The retirement accounts of millions of people worth trillions of dollars are at risk. October 2022, the UK pension system was literally hours away from a total collapse. The US has over $193 trillion of unfunded liabilities. The Australian government wants to use your super to invest in military spending, which is not acceptable. Listen, your retirement account, it is not safe, it is not secure, and it is not guaranteed. Andy, what's going on, mate? People have worked their whole lives to have enough to retire on. Can you explain why people's retirement accounts may not be as safe as they think and what the solution may be?
Fabulous opening question. I think with a $3.5 trillion pot of money in Australia sitting in superannuation, clearly that's too big a honeypot for the government to look at and not want to grab their hands on it. So we see a lot of what's happening in economy and how investments are going and the challenges in the macroeconomic environment and bond market blowing up. And like you say, the gilt market in the UK back in October last year having significant challenges and being hours away from blowing up. I think there's challenges all over the place, and I think the ability to opt out and take your money out of their system and get it into your own and get it into Bitcoin. And we're very privileged here in Australia to have a self-managed super capability that means we can invest in what we want to invest in and take control of our own funds. And thankfully for me and many others like me, we're able to move our superannuation funds into Bitcoin and self-custody Bitcoin, giving us kind of the ultimate control over our retirement savings and not leave them at the whim of people running managed funds and the government, staring at this big pot of money going, how can we have some more of that? Thanks.
So before we dive into who you are, I know that you're out of the traditional system. You're talking about self-managed super funds, which I guess for the international audience, it's like the pension or your retirement account. Most people have a super fund, which is controlled by a regulated entity. What I want to dive into is how you can take control of those retirement funds to stop whether it's the government or the corporations from being able to take a haircut using that money for military spending or something that you don't agree with. So can you dive a little bit into what the difference is between a self-managed super fund and super in general, or just a retirement plan, and what makes it so unique and how you've gone down this rabbit hole, giving yourself peace of mind and freedom?
Sure. It's quite an expansive topic, retirement and superannuation, but like a 401k in the US or a pension scheme in the UK or Europe, the superannuation industry is pretty well developed in Australia, and every month people are compulsorily contribute to their superannuation. So I think at the moment it's 11% of your salary. And so every month those funds get allocated to you. And most people tend not to think about it too much. You start a job, you get allocated to a super fund. If you do take a bit of interest, then maybe you pick the super fund of your choice based on whatever kind of beliefs or ideals or performance you think is important. And fundamentally, then that 11% of your salary, goes into your super contributions every month, and you kind of don't think about it. And over the years, those tend to accumulate really nicely. And I think the average kind of 10-year returns in the super industry in Australia, it hovers around sort of 8 or 10% per year. So over many years, that accumulates nicely. You're putting in that percentage of your salary, you're accruing whatever returns. It's as volatile as the market is. They're typically allocated to bonds and stocks and unlisted assets and real estate trusts and all sorts of different things. And so, I took a look at my super funds in around 2020 when I fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And I was thinking, well, I really want to buy more Bitcoin. And I don't have a lot of free cash flow, but I've been saving, DCAing into Bitcoin and a personal stack, and that's been gradually accumulating. But like every Bitcoiner, I want more Bitcoin. So I thought, hang on a second, I've got this pot of money over here in my superannuation. I'd really love to see if I can allocate some of that to Bitcoin, if not all of it. And so I was with Australian Super at the time and contacted them on email and said, hey, I'm really interested in Bitcoin, and could you let me know how I can get some exposure with my superannuation funds into Bitcoin? It took a week or so, and I got a response back from Australian Super, and all the traditional FUD that you would expect to hear from an uneducated, no-coiner traditional finance institution. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's used for terrorism. It's fraudulent. You'll lose all your money. It's too high risk. The government will ban it, so on and so on. And really that kind of spurred me to work out, actually, there's got to be a better way. So I did my research and discovered pretty quickly that in Australia, you can have a self-managed super fund. So I worked out what that entailed and how to set one up and how to move my funds from Australian super into a self-managed super fund that I set up. And it was a little bit of a not complicated, but laborious process. You kind of follow the bouncing ball. You work out how to set up a self-managed super and a corporate trustee, and there's a number of kind of paperwork steps to go through. You then have to understand some of the rules around what you can and can't do and how you move the funds around, how you can buy Bitcoin. Net, I created bitcoinsuper.io, which is a website that documented that journey and kind of gift to the world. This is how you do it. All the instructions. I used eSuperFund as my self-managed super provider and follow all of their instructions and set up a corporate trustee. I explain all of these steps on that website. And really, within about 3 months, and it could have been a little bit quicker, but I was doing it towards the end of the tax year. So everyone's kind of busy at the end of tax year. So it took a little bit longer than it normally would. But after about 3 months, I had those funds out of Australian super and ultimately into self-custody Bitcoin. And now every monthly contribution that comes in from my employer gets DCA'd into Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin stack is now accumulating nicely and is sat in collaborative custody and cold storage.
I also went down exactly the same route, used an eSuper fund as well, 2020 or late 2019 going into it. Took about 2.5 months, I think. Long process. One of the things that I would like to say for everyone watching, it is possible and it is worth looking into. It does take a long time. I think there's either 30 or 60 pages that required my signature. When we got a mortgage, there's about 5 signatures. So they wanted 6 times or 600% more signatures where you sign it. A lot of detail around it. The rules are very, very clear. And there's big, you can get in a lot of trouble if you're not following it very quickly. So in regards to that, Andy, you're now working with the Bitcoin Advisor. You've got a website up there, bitcoinsuper.io. I urge everyone to check that out. I've linked it in the show notes. But with the Bitcoin Advisor, you're talking to really high net worth individuals. And I understand everyone watching may not be a high net worth individual. But what's this transition been, and what's the Bitcoin Advisor doing to help people in this situation? Because whether it's the pension funds, the super funds, it's getting very risky to be 100% allocated to whatever these traditional financial schemes are. With the Bitcoin Advisor, I feel like you guys are creating an option of freedom for people to be able to empower the individual again. If you don't mind diving into that for us today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Sean. So really, bitcoinsuper.io and what I did with self-managed super and kind of explain that. I presented at a few meetups and other events, Bitcoin Bush Bash, which is a fabulous event. I'd encourage everyone to try and get to one. That's how I met Peter, and we had a lot in common around understanding how this all works and understanding collaborative custody and how to structure things. And so at the start of the year, we really launched the Bitcoin Advisor out of everything Peter was doing for the multifamily offices that he looks after and the very robust kind of security model and inheritance planning and asset protection and other things. So we hit it off, and we've started the Bitcoin Advisor along with Jake to really bring that set of services, not just actually to high net worth individuals, but to Bitcoiners in general. And we have a real spread of amount of Bitcoin that clients have with us. Because we genuinely believe anyone with more than a Bitcoin is most likely going to be a high net worth individual at some point. So it's really good to make sure that you've got all of the right legal frameworks in place, that you've got the right custody solution in place, that you understand estate planning and asset protection deeply for when you're going to need it. There's a lot of these processes and frameworks are available to high net worths and they need them. So as a Bitcoiner, as the price of Bitcoin does what we all think it's going to do, you will also need them. So we really want to bring our services to a very broad audience. And it's robust and egalitarian in the fact that it works just as well for someone with a small allocation of Bitcoin as it does with someone with a very large allocation of Bitcoin. And really, to tie these things together, everyone's suffering with cost of living issues. Nobody has that much spare money lying around these days, and so being able to look at your superannuation and say, hey, I've got $100, $200, $300 plus $1,000 sat over there, and actually I want more Bitcoin. Then to be able to bring it over into a self-managed super, get it into collaborative custody like we're doing with clients, be able to sleep at night knowing that it's in long-term cold storage that is safe and secure and not subject to any single points of failure in terms of that security model. And then your family also understanding that if anything happens to you, that they're able to access those funds in those worst of circumstances by picking the phone up and having a conversation. That's really the kind of driver for the Bitcoin advisor, and we're finding an absolutely amazing acceptance in the market for what we're doing, all the way from no coiners who can barely spell multi-sig, all the way through to hardcore maxis who actually begin to realize that they've worked really hard to accumulate their stack. They may well understand single sig very well, or even multi-sig, but there are single points of failure in their security model that we can address and help them with. So the sum of all of those things really brings us to the service that the Bitcoin advisor provides, and we're really beginning to grow that very rapidly now, and very excited about the coming weeks, months, and years. So.
100%. For everyone watching, I can only talk about myself here, but I did go down the rabbit hole of self-managed super and went 100% allocation into Bitcoin there. I had very little super to start off with. Some people may say it was luck or perfect timing, maybe proper preparation and being ready and willing to take that risk, but that has turned into a fairly substantial amount. And because it is super and it's so regulated, I will, as a client myself, be signed up with the Bitcoin advisor for my self-managed super fund and going through that, because they have something called collaborative custody. It's a word that you've mentioned a couple of times. Before we get into that, one of these sayings, Andy, is not your keys, not your coins. It's something that's thrown around all the time. Your keys are your password to your Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, it allows you to hold this asset, to take responsibility, control, but with great power comes great responsibility. What you guys are doing with the collaborative custody model removes all that risk around that. So can you dive into that and why that may or may not resonate with some people, who it's for and who it's not for?
Absolutely. And it's the first kind of thread of conversation we have with every prospect that we talk to, because it's the crux of making sure that your Bitcoin's safe. And absolutely, not your keys, not your coins. And we believe in that as strongly as anybody. And fundamentally, the collaborative custody model leans on software providers like Unchained or Casa or Nunchuck or others. Let's take Unchained as an example. We take clients through the process where their hands are on the keyboard, they're setting up their accounts, they're doing everything themselves, so it's completely under their own control. We would create an account on Unchained. They set that account up. We provide our key as one of the 2 of 3 keys. They upload their key, and Unchained is the third key. And that account is secured with 2-factor authentication. So only the client has access to that account. Only the client can get in, and only the client can generate a sending transaction back out. So I'll just run through the scenario really quickly. Sean, you're a client. So you hold a key. The Bitcoin advisor holds a key, and Unchained holds a key. Now, in a classic single sig scenario, if you lost your device and couldn't find your seed phrase, your funds are gone. It's a single point of failure. You're a single point of failure. If you're in a multi-sig setup where you hold 2 of the 3 keys, same thing goes. If something goes wrong with both those keys and backups at the same time, then you've lost your funds. Whereas in the scenario that we're describing with collaborative custody, you hold a key, we hold a key, and Unchained holds a key. So if you lose your key and seed phrase, and I had a client just last week who had forgotten his PIN code to his Trezor and couldn't find where he'd hidden the seed phrase. Now, thankfully, it wasn't a lot of funds, but it was an abject lesson in single points of failure. So in the scenario that we're talking about here, If you lose your key and seed phrase, normally it would be a catastrophic loss. But in this scenario, we can work with you and Unchained to swap your key out and recover your funds. If the Bitcoin advisor ceases to exist, then you can work with Unchained to swap our key out and recover funds. And in the scenario that Unchained ceases to exist, then you can work with us to swap their key out and recover funds. And so there's no single point of failure in that setup. And because the account is secured with your two-factor authentication and only you have access, then it means that your funds are secure in every model. Now, the next kind of scenario is, well, what's to stop the Bitcoin advisor and Unchained colluding against you to take your funds? In that scenario, again, two-factor authentication secures the account. Only you're able to generate sending transactions, and your account is fully secure to you, so we can't collude against you. Now, the next kind of immediate question that we always get asked, well, what happens if something happens to the client? You got knocked over by a bus scenario. Well, in that scenario, we work with you once all of this is set up to create what we call an estate plan protocol that describes the setup of your funds, your vault, where your funds are coming from, which keys secure them, vault configuration files, which are downloaded from Unchained. And that document sits behind your will, so that if something happens to you, the executor of your estate can act on your behalf with a notarized death certificate, and we can validate that the death is real. And in that scenario, we can work with the executor of your estate and Unchained to move the funds into your beneficiary's destination vaults or accounts or exchanges, depending on your wishes. And so in that scenario, we've got a bulletproof setup that means no funds can be lost, that there are sufficient backups in place with our key and Unchained's platform, and fundamentally there, no funds are lost. And we've taken numerous families through that process. Unfortunately, clients do pass away. And so, we're very proud of the fact that we've never lost a Satoshi. And we think that is a minimum bar to success. Nothing less than perfection is acceptable. And so delivering that service to clients, we know they sleep peacefully at night, knowing that their Bitcoin's safe and secure and can't go wrong in the event that something happens.
100%. Where I see what you guys are doing at the Bitcoin Advisor, where I see it as very necessary, is for that estate planning. And I guess in my case, with the self-managed super fund and being able to hand it on. With Bitcoin, I'm sure most people watching this already know, but if I pass away and I haven't done any estate planning and my wife or my partner doesn't know how to get those 24 words and unlock my Bitcoin, then that Bitcoin is fundamentally gone. It's wiped out of the system. If I pass away, I'm passing away with my Bitcoin. And it's basically a donation to the rest of the network. If you've gone through 3, 5, 10 years and all the propaganda that's come out, all the conversations with your friends, family, saying you're wrong, everything that you need to deal with as you go through this journey of Bitcoin, to end up being right and then to be able to pass away and for that not to be handed on or moved into the next generation, I think that's an absolute failure. So I think what you guys are doing there is phenomenal. Can we dive into a little bit of the estate planning? It's not something that I've dived into too much myself. So I'm just curious on what that looks like, and maybe two scenarios. Someone that's got maybe a Bitcoin and then someone that's got, say, 10, 50, 100 Bitcoin, because you are dealing with people over that spectrum, some very high net worth individuals as well. But what's that look like when they pass away and that estate planning process before that tragic event?
Yeah, sure. So there's really two sides to it. There's the physical process of passing Bitcoin from the owner to the beneficiary. And really, that's the bit that we're helping out with in terms of the estate plan protocol. It's not a legal document. It's a set of instructions on how to recover funds, and ultimately, actually, for that widow or estate to know that there's somebody that they can pick the phone up to and say, hey, so-and-so's passed away. We really need to recover the funds. And there's a whole legal process wrapped around that called probate. And you work with the executors and do all of that. And so that side, ensuring that you can actually get the bearer asset from where it is to where it needs to go is really important. And that's the bit that you described, that there is always a disparity in understanding between the Bitcoin owner and spouse. One will always know more than the other. We come across clients where husband and wife are on the same page and both have a mutually very solid understanding, but that's the exception, not the rule. Generally speaking, the Bitcoiner is much more knowledgeable than their better half. So we also help kind of address that disparity in a lot of the conversations we have. And Peter and I spend a lot of time with clients talking to their wives and running them through the process of recovering funds and moving Bitcoin to make sure that they're comfortable as well as the husband is comfortable to do these things, and vice versa in a number of scenarios too. Then there is kind of the estate planning side of things, which is much more of a legal kind of discussion. And we make a lot of recommendations to some very knowledgeable lawyers who understand Bitcoin as an asset, but fundamentally have very deep understanding of estate law. And that varies by jurisdiction around the world. We have clients all over the world, and so we make recommendations out to different lawyers. But we often spend our time at least exploring options with Bitcoiners about how to consider what to do with their Bitcoin and how to think about generational inheritance and protecting wealth over generations. Peter's other business, Net Worth Advisors, in the family office, their primary goal in life is wealth preservation. So they're very good at understanding the options available, whether it's discretionary trusts or testamentary trusts. We talk a lot about those to clients and the options available. Now, Bitcoin is an asset like any other asset. If you pass away, you can do something called a testamentary trust, which last will and testament. A testamentary trust is something that gets set up upon your death, and all of your assets move into that trust upon your death. And then you can put instructions in your will about the beneficiaries of that trust and disbursement rules and other things to take care of your family post your passing. And there's lots of interesting things you can do that, and lots of protections you can put in place. One of the kind of scenarios we often talk about, you might have a couple of kids, and maybe when your daughter's 25, she wants to buy a house. You've already passed away a number of years ago. Your testamentary trust is there looking after her as one of the beneficiaries, and maybe it has a lot of Bitcoin that have become worth millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, and therefore there's substantial funds in that trust. Well, she can ask that trust to buy her a house, and that house can sit in the trust. Now, she may well get married, and 2 and 3 marriages end in divorce. So maybe the new husband turns out to be a bum and wants to take half of her estate and half of her Bitcoin and half of her house. Well, if it's all sat in a testamentary trust, he has no access to that because she doesn't own it. The trust owns it. She benefits from it all without being legally exposed through family law courts and other things. So it's just kind of one of the scenarios to think about, that as a parent and as a father and with generations to come, I want to make sure that they're taken care of and looked after. And we find a lot of Bitcoiners just don't think about this stuff. Like, everyone kind of lives in the now, and they're saving Bitcoin and they think it's great. But you actually have to think about what's going to happen if you're not around tomorrow and you get knocked over by a bus. So.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. How fascinating. If we link back, why are we even having this conversation about Bitcoin right now? At the start, we talked about the total financial collapse. With it, how's Bitcoin reducing that risk? Because it's a very volatile asset class. It can move huge amounts in a day. So when people start to hear this conversation, they get into the weeds of it. And we're talking about Bitcoiners making their retirement safer, more secure, and then they see the price fluctuations. They may think it's too risky and step back. What type of conversations, Andy, are you having in regards to the volatility and risk mitigation?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, great question, and something that everybody asks. And there's nobody that says that you have to put 100% allocation into Bitcoin or 100% into your self-managed super. You can hold both a managed fund and a self-managed fund. Obviously, there's increased fees with that and other kind of administrative challenges, but generally speaking, it's quite straightforward. And often a lot of clients will maintain a smaller balance in a managed fund to maintain the insurances that they've had in place for many years. So it's not unusual for that to happen. So when it comes to volatility and risk, obviously a lot of clients confuse those two things and think they're the same thing. something that's volatile is risky. Well, not necessarily. If you understand the volatility and you know what it's going to do over a 4-year cycle, and you can see how it's behaved in the last 15 years, and you understand that volatility, I'd argue that it's not risky because it's a bearer asset that is sat in your own self-custody, in collaborative custody in the case that we're describing with clients, where nobody can touch it. You're the only one who has access to it. The government can't come in and grab it. If your money's in a managed fund run by a regulated business in Australia, and all of a sudden they change the tax rules, or all of a sudden they tax those businesses or whatever, then or they're investing in assets that are riskier. Maybe they over allocate to bonds because they think bonds are the best thing ever and don't appreciate the volatility of those assets. All of that to me is risk. That's all counterparty risk that I don't want to be exposed to. So I actually consider Bitcoin to be the least risky asset because it's like a bar of gold in my own vault. It's my own money sat in my own control, and I don't consider that risky. Yes, it's volatile, and over the longer term, it's well proven to be volatile to the upside, and that's the asymmetric bet we're all taking, and I'm prepared to take with my superannuation money because I can't touch it till I'm 60. So it's the most perfect low time preference investment. It's going to be sat there for another 15 odd years until I can access it, and therefore it's a fabulous investment to put Bitcoin into or super into Bitcoin for that purpose.
Okay, so people that are just jumping into this conversation, why Bitcoin and not some type of crypto? There's things out there like XRP, Ethereum, Cardano, not even specifically about them, but there's the Bitcoin argument, there's the crypto argument. Why not split and diversify a little bit? Why focus more on the Bitcoin side of things?
I would come back to that counterparty risk argument that I use for leaving funds in a managed fund. Bitcoin is a long-term savings account. It shows fabulous opportunity for long-term growth, and it's a stable asset from that regard. I consider altcoins to be, gambling, and at the end of the day, they're extremely volatile, like Bitcoin is. But they come with absolutely increased risk because you're exposed to all that counterparty mess that happens with Ethereum or XRP or Solana or any of them. Would I want to put my long-term savings, and particularly my pension savings, into something that's exposed to such a large amount of counterparty risk? Absolutely not. That's not to say that anybody else couldn't and may want to choose to. With a self-managed super, you can diversify your holdings across different asset classes. You can put it into stocks and bonds and ETFs and property that you don't live in, and fine art and wine and all sorts of different things. And perhaps our favorite phrase in the Bitcoin Advisor is "you do you." You decide where you want to put your money, and it's all about you saving for your retirement. And if you want to leave it in a managed fund, leave it in a managed fund. But I think I'm prepared to take the opportunity that Bitcoin provides me and put it in long-term savings. I don't see speculative altcoins as a long-term savings vehicle. They may enable you to make gains in the short term, but Bitcoin's a get rich slowly scheme, and altcoins are a get poor quickly scheme. So I know which one I prefer to put my pension funds in.
Yeah, 100%. And just for everyone watching, not a knock on crypto. It's like investing in startups. Most of them are going to fail. You may get lucky, but you do need to put a lot of time and attention there. With Bitcoin, I see it for myself more as a bit of a set and forget. There's 21 million Bitcoin. That's all that's ever going to be there. It was created to be the world's best engineered form of money. It's digitally scarce. Nobody can get in the way of me sending my Bitcoin to Andy sending it to me or Peter or Jake or whoever it is, if you take control of it. And that's what the Bitcoin Advisor is doing. Andy, I've actually done everyone watching a favor and put your links below, both to bitcoinsuper.io and the Bitcoin Advisor. But for people that are starting this Bitcoin journey, if they're listening about self-managed super funds, they've probably dove down the rabbit hole a little bit. Maybe they've read Beers for Bitcoin, which is with someone that you guys have paired up for. But what's the key takeaway and the key message for people in regards to the failing financial system? And like really, what's going on at a macro level that's making Bitcoin more important to understand and study now than ever before? Because it used to be a lot cheaper. It's fairly expensive at the moment in some people's eyes. So why should they even bother taking on that assumed risk to reward ratio?
Yeah, sure. There's quite a lot there to unpack. Maybe I'll start with before I moved my funds into self-managed super and particularly bought Bitcoin with it. There's just this inherent innate trust that you put in the traditional system that it's there to look after you and take care of you. And I think that trust over the last few years, for many reasons, has really been shaken to the core. And so I certainly looked internally and said, do I actually trust that my best interests are their best interests and vice versa? And I really frankly came to the answer that's no. And then from a more macro level, you look at what's happening in the States. How does the phrase go? If the US catches a cold, the rest of the world, if the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And so you can see what's going on in the debt spiral and the markets in the States, and their spending going absolutely bananas since they suspended the debt ceiling, and the knock-on implications of the impact of the bond market. And US Treasuries then have knock-on impacts to markets everywhere. Interest rates are through the roof. Everyone's feeling the cost of living impact that's causing. There's just so much uncertainty and instability and volatility in the financial exchange markets, and it's really uncertain. Particularly the huge impact that working from home is having on the valuation of commercial property and commercial real estate. It's well documented. The smaller banks in the States are at significant risk of failure. We saw bank failures earlier in the year, and there could well be many more to come. If you look at the great financial crisis, there was a several-month gap in the middle of 2008 between the first bank failures and then utter carnage on the markets. All of that seems to be potentially playing out again. And so I really, now I'm on the other side of the fence with my money. I've taken my superannuation savings out of the traditional system. I've got them in self-custody Bitcoin. I cannot imagine a scenario in the near future where I would ever consider going back the other way. I feel so much more safe and secure in the knowledge that that money is under my own control than leaving it at the whims of the markets and asset managers. And you look at the likes of Australian Super and the other big super funds. Their lead investment managers who are based all over the world are all earning $1 million salaries and everything else. I'm looking at all of that money pouring out of my super into their pockets, and I'm going, hang on, let me put it in Bitcoin and keep it safe and secure. And Peter's opinions on the pricing model for Bitcoin and the potential upside and everything else are very well documented on a whole bunch of videos. He has a very genuine belief that the days ahead of us are going to be even more lucrative than the days behind us. But previous performance is no predictor of future performance. And but I see everything that's going on around the world and in the markets, and I think, well, I've got a better chance with Bitcoin than I do with the traditional funds and the traditional environments. And just because you can't afford a whole Bitcoin or 10 Bitcoin or 50 Bitcoin or whatever it is, the price appreciation could well be dramatically higher than we've seen to date. And therefore, you kind of need to get away from the unit bias of Bitcoin and understand that you can buy as little as $5, $10, $100. And with super, if you're getting contributions from your employer of 11% of your salary, that's a reasonable amount of money every month to also be able to dollar cost average into Bitcoin and provide you a pretty solid exposure to it. And just to close that off, like I said before, you don't need to be 100% allocated, but put 5% in or 10% in or 25% in. That exposure to Bitcoin will probably mean the difference between retiring and not retiring. I think that opportunity is there for everybody, and you should really seriously consider whether some of your funds ought to be in Bitcoin, and why not use super as the vehicle to do that.
One of the things there is you guys with the Bitcoin Advisor, you have a couple of frameworks and stuff to be able to help people out and hold their hand. So if people are just interested and they require more information, check out the links below. It's probably the easiest way, and have a phone call conversation. I'm sure if someone's to jump on the phone, it's probably not going to cost them anything to have an initial conversation with you
Certainly
guys.
Not. We spend our days talking to Bitcoiners. Like I have 4, 5, 6 hours a day of discussions with no coiners, pre-coiners, Bitcoiners, maxis, you name it. And I love nothing better than having those conversations and talking through people's different situations and scenarios. Peter is often on those calls with me as well, and we love talking to Bitcoiners about how to do things better. And even if the Bitcoin advisor isn't the right solution for you, we'll happily share everything that we do. It's all on the website. We're happy to talk openly about how to do things yourself and roll your own. And our primary mission in life really is Bitcoin off exchanges, and making sure that, and we use this example often with clients. If you can write on a piece of paper, if I wasn't here tomorrow, can you access my Bitcoin, and hand that to your better half or your beneficiaries? And if the answer to that question isn't a good one, by all means, just give us a call and let's have a talk about it and help you improve the way that you're doing things.
Yeah. Let's switch gears. What do you think the future of, I guess, the world economy is, and then how Bitcoin may play a role macroeconomically? We are seeing like countries like El Salvador accepted as legal tender. Do you think that adoption rate's going to continue to rise, or are they going to government's going to try push Bitcoin out more and more, because we are sort of seeing both things play out over the last couple of years?
It's a great question. I think this is really where game theory comes in. Everyone can clearly see that even after just a couple of short years, that El Salvador is significantly better off than it was. And it's not all down to Bitcoin. Bitcoin may well fix everything, but certainly having a leader in a position of power who has made the decisions that he's made to clean up the crime rates and sort out the economy and fix corruption and all of those things is clearly very positive. And his approval ratings, speak to that, as well as the economic performance of the country. I can't imagine there aren't too many other similar-sized countries or countries in difficult positions like El Salvador were that aren't looking at that experience and saying, well, I want some of that. It's going to improve the life of their populations dramatically, and it's a huge opportunity. You can look at Singapore as the example of the traditional finance system doing that to a nation state. So I'm sure like other countries are looking at that, looking at El Salvador and absolutely considering how they may do things. And I'm sure there are bigger countries. Mexico often comes up in podcasts as one that may well make moves as well. So who knows? But so I think game theory comes into play there. I also think, everything around BRICS is very interesting. I think just this morning they announced about 5 or 6 additional countries that are going to become fully paid up members of BRICS come January. Saudi Arabia, Iran, and a whole bunch of others. I mean, who would have thought that Saudi Arabia and Iran were going to move into a friendly organization together even just a few short years ago? And so I think that will play out. I think clearly, the dollar isn't going to go anywhere in a hurry, but America is in a debt spiral. Their debt is out of control, and they're having to print more and more dollars to pay for that debt. And it's well documented on others' podcasts what that means. So you can do lots of research into the implications of that. Now, does Bitcoin take over quickly? Who knows? But it certainly offers an alternative place for your money. And I think that's what we're doing with self-managed super and my personal stack. And we're seeing lots of issues with the way that the banks are trying to restrict movement of money into exchanges and using fraud as an excuse. And I've got some reasonable thoughts on why they're doing that. We've kind of follow the money and follow the incentive, and you'll work out why they're doing what they're doing. So maybe we can dive into that a little bit as well.
Yeah, actually, I've been having a lot of trouble with my bank, Commonwealth Bank. You suck, in regards to getting my money off into a centralized exchange, so then I can put it into cold storage there. In Australia, it's well documented. Operation Choke Point 2.0, they're labeling it as. Before we dive into that, Andy, you were talking, or you said Bitcoin may fix this. Bitcoiners say Bitcoin fixes everything. So can you dive into maybe a little bit about the how, like the sound money principle side of things before we pivot the conversation?
So Bitcoin, clearly, being 21 million, being easily transportable, being under self-custody and your own funds, just means that the state can't mess with the money. Get the state out of your money is absolutely why Bitcoin fixes this. It means they can't devalue your hard work and time, and it enables you to save money for the future. I mean, there's so many examples of why inflation is such an insidious tax on people and how it diminishes all the hard work that you put in. I can't tell you the number of clients we talk to who have large cash positions sitting in bank accounts, and they're sat there going, "It's a melting ice cube," to use Michael Saylor's phrase, and they're like, "We need to do something with it. We need to put it somewhere where it's safe and secure." They understand the volatility, like we talked about earlier, but over the long term, they know that it's the best method of ensuring that they have money for themselves in later life, but also can pass on money to their next generation. So just the properties of Bitcoin and its ability to keep the state out of it is a really powerful capability. And I think even beyond that, being transportable and also meaning that you can create wallets and move money around without having to go through the nonsense KYC AML processes that again are a ridiculous imposition on financial institutions. I think if you look at every dollar that is recovered through fraud because of KYC AML, it ends up costing the bank $10 to do that. Like, that just makes no sense. And so Bitcoin becomes this pseudonymous traceable asset to some degree that actually makes fraud harder, not easier. So
100%. And if it's $10 to recover a dollar, somebody has to foot that bill, and it's not going to be the bank or the bank managers. So I guess with Bitcoin, if you dive down and you take it as a bearer asset, you are holding digital cash basically, and there's nobody hopping in the way to be able to stop that. Andy, one of the things you touched on is inflation and some of your clients holding huge amounts of money in their bank account, but it's like a melting ice cube. A dollar's going to be worth a dollar, especially the US dollar. $1 is $1. So what do you mean by inflation, and how's their purchasing power being eroded? How's that work out over, say, like a 7 or a 10-year time frame if they've got $100,000 in their bank account?
I think that's the critical phrase, right? It's purchasing power. Look at the euro. The euro is a great example, a new currency that actually isn't that much older than Bitcoin. It's been around 25 years, I think. And excuse me if I got my numbers wrong, but it's lost 40% of its purchasing power in that time. So you can look at things like real estate in Australia, and everyone's saying, "Wow, I've got $700,000 more than my reserve," or "My house is worth so much more money." But is it? Is your house actually worth any more money? It's actually, the money is worth less. And so you might have more of the dollars, but you can't buy as much with it. I look at apartments around near where I live in the eastern suburbs, and they're selling for $2-3 million for a 3-bedroom apartment. It's absolute insanity. I've lived here for 15 years, and they were a third of that. So has the property gone up that much, or has the dollar gone down that much?
Yeah, I think that's what my wife, my better half, and I found during COVID as well. Our house nearly doubled in value. It's the same house. It's in the same location. The house hasn't changed in any way whatsoever. They just printed a crazy amount of money, and therefore that value has inflated away, along with everything. And probably people notice it the most when they go to buy groceries or pay their electricity bill. Let's talk about choke point 2.0. Basically, the way that I see it is the banks are making it harder for people to be able to opt out and be able to buy Bitcoin or whatever it is they want as a digital asset. But you're probably better at explaining it than me. If you wouldn't mind diving into that one for us, please, Andy.
Yeah, of course. And, we see articles on almost the daily talking about, limiting the amount of funds that you can move into a crypto exchange or a Bitcoin exchange on a monthly basis. I think Combank's latest one was $10,000 a month is the maximum amount. And the reason for that is, according to them, to stop the perpetration of fraud. And at first glance, that seems sensible, that you don't want fraud to be perpetrated. You don't want your clients to be losing money. You want to make sure that they're safe and secure. But you peel it back a little bit and have a think about it. I don't think it's as obvious as that. And particularly if you look at other news articles, there was one this week that some person had been saving really hard for the last 10 years to save their house deposit of $250,000. I mean, crazy as that sounds, and got scammed through an email scam and affinity scam, and ended up sending their money to the wrong place. And suddenly the bank's not calling for banning mortgages or mortgage brokers or buying houses. Like they're not trying to limit withdrawals for that reason. So it seems a bit disingenuous to layer it back to crypto as well. And when you do look at it in a little bit more detail, and I'll use some numbers as an example, we had a good think about this. Say you have $50,000 on deposit in your bank. I mean, I wish, but say you did. The bank is able, through fractional reserve lending, to turn that $50,000 into $1 million mortgage that they can sell. So there's a 20 to 1, they can turn it into this $1 million mortgage. And from there, suggest they earn maybe 2% on that $1 million mortgage that they've just sold to another client. And so they're going to make $20,000 in profit on that mortgage. And then you look at the PE ratios of the banks, and for argument's sake, call it 20 to 1. That $20,000 of profit on that $50,000 deposit you had actually equates to about $400,000 of market cap. And so I would argue quite clearly that it is in the bank's best interest to not let $50,000 walk out the door into Bitcoin, because they are missing out on significant amounts of profit through mortgage relending, and then, of course, the impact to their bottom line, or at least their market cap, of that money not going to work for them. So it seems to make a lot more sense to me that they're restricting outflows from the traditional system into Bitcoin for self-protection reasons, much more than they are fraudulent reasons, particularly when crypto fraud is such a small proportion of overall fraud when it comes to the banks. And my final point on that, there is no restriction on the amount of money that can come from crypto exchanges back into the banks. So they're clearly not worried about the source of the funds. They're just worried about the funds leaving. So take all of that with a pinch of salt and kind of do your own research and follow the money. But it seems to make sense to me that they're more self-interested than they are about interested in whether or not you're getting scammed, particularly if you're, any reasonable person that wants to move their money into Bitcoin.
So I got into Bitcoin 2019, towards the end of 2019, and nearly every week, or maybe every second week, I've transferred money from my account into an exchange and then to cold storage. They come up with these brand new rules, frameworks, whatever, Commonwealth in particular, the $10,000 a month. For a lot of people listening, maybe that's a lot of money, but if you've worked your whole life and you've got your super account, you've created a self-managed super, you've put it into CommBank, and you've got $200,000 there, well, you're only allowed to move $10,000 a month. So they're stopping those outflows. But say in my case in particular, I'm not moving $10,000 a month or every month with that. But I just want to be able to buy Bitcoin. The price has come down, for example, which happened last week. I wanted to buy Bitcoin then and there. Usually I just do my DCA. I buy it every week or every second week. But there's a big dip. And so I just straight away did a pay ID transaction, Commonwealth, to a centralized exchange. Pay ID should be absolutely instantly. And before they brought in these new laws that would show up within about 30 seconds, a minute max, they're now putting that on hold for 24 hours. Whereas because it's going to a crypto or a Bitcoin exchange, I could go down to the ATM and I could spend that money at the casino doing whatever. So for me, it just feels like it's not making any sense. And it's biased. I understand a little bit tinfoil hat. Whether it's for the reason of what Andy's saying is they need to have the money to stay in the system so they can lend out more money, or it's more sinister, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they are putting in capital controls. And I think I feel like we've got this window right now to be able to study Bitcoin and how it fixes this, because Bitcoin does fix this. It comes back down. Andy, you've been in Bitcoin for a while, but you've got an IT background, I believe 30 years, you're sort of a couple of different segments, 2 15-year segments, and you're going into your third epoch. Now, but what was it that brought you into Bitcoin? Was it the technology side of it, that is a scarce digital asset? What was your personal Bitcoin journey?
It probably should have been the tech side, but actually it was the macro side of things and everything that I saw happening. So it was early 2020 when I first came across Bitcoin, and was very interested in everything that was happening, with COVID and the markets crashing. And the older I get, I'm a single dad with two kids. I kind of think of my own mortality more and more, and making sure that my kids are taken care of for their futures. And it's really that side of things that appealed to me most, and being able to then take control of my own money and make my own decisions. I feel Bitcoin's changed me in so many different ways, and I've met so many wonderful people, and now get to work in Bitcoin as well, which is even better. I get to talk to Bitcoiners all day for a living, and that's just fabulous. So I think I came into it for those reasons, but stayed for many, many more as you go down all the different rabbit holes involved.
It's so interesting how multifaceted it is. Like Daz B and Seb Bunny have teamed up with the Bitcoin Advisor. They wrote a very easy to understand book for the everyday person. And then you've got people like Safedine Amoose with the Bitcoin Stand, very high level, very complicated. But I think, like yourself, you come here and you hear about this magic internet money, or you come here for the gains and end up staying for the revolution. And saying that, what would you like people to take away from this conversation? Is there a revolution going on? What are your thoughts in regards to Bitcoin this time in history right now? Because it is exciting. If you do the right thing, some amazing things can happen. You can set yourself up for the rest of your life. You can protect your retirement accounts, but you need to study Bitcoin and the reason why Bitcoin plays an important role, or could. But what would you like to share with the audience?
Honestly, like I keep saying, I get to talk to Bitcoiners all day, every day. And so everyone turns up for different reasons. Everyone discovers it for different reasons, whether it's a financial advisor that you've trusted for 20 years, who's looked after your family and your parents and their grandparents, and you've got these amazing relationships with financial advisors who care about your well-being and your future. There's a few of them out there who are enlightened of Bitcoin and understand what it is and the opportunity it presents, all the way through to hardcore maxis who've been studying it for a really long time, and just about everybody in between. Everybody has to start somewhere, and absolutely agree. Take the time to study it, read some good books. There's lots of resources out there. Podcasts like this are amazing for helping educate people. But don't hesitate to buy a bit. Like, go through the process of go buy $100. Like, there's plenty of apps out there. You can use Amber app or Bitaroo or anything locally in Australia that any of the good Bitcoin only exchanges. Go buy $100 of it, and you'll learn more because you're then self-interested and fascinated about what it's doing. Learn about the volatility and understand why it's not risky. And the more you learn, the more you understand. And understanding about custodying it safely and securely, and that there are people out there to help you do that properly. It's not overly complicated. There's been so many wonderful Twitter threads recently of if you can drive a car or raise a child, you can self-custody Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It really isn't that difficult. And even if it is that difficult, we can help you with it and help you do that. But just start with $100, because then you can put in $200, and then you can put in $1,000. And all of a sudden, you'll go from, I didn't have much savings, to where did all of that come from? I know before Bitcoin, I was horrible at hand-to-mouth savings, and really didn't have any money at all. And over the years, I've gradually accumulated more and more and dollar cost averaged, and I end up in a situation where all of a sudden I've got a reasonable stack of Bitcoin that I think is going to last past my lifetime into my kids and so on.
100%. I've been on that same journey as well. Started off with a very small amount, and then as you keep stacking and the price changes and we go through these cycles, the 4-year cycle, if you have a long-term time frame, ladies and gentlemen, you truly are taking your future into your own hands. Andy, I did an absolutely incredible video with your both of your business partners, Jake Woodhouse and Peter Dunworth. Peter Dunworth's talking about a $7 billion Bitcoin. He's got the framework and the thought experiment behind that. So I urge everyone to reach out to Andy, to Jake, to Peter. Those links are in the description there. Say Sean said hello. But check out this video here with Peter. It's an absolute banger. And if I'm pointing in the right direction, it's going to pop up there. Have a beautiful day. Peace.
Thanks, Sean.
Cool.